For the past 22 years, I've worked in the airline industry, and to anyone who understands the airline industry, it's one of the gayest industries out there. Um, I'm a straight person, but I couldn't care less if somebody is gay. I'd be in a very uncomfortable position if I did, so maybe that's part of the reason why I still work there. But it has given me, over the years, a unique sort of view into the gay lifestyle, um, and how the gay lifestyle has developed over the last couple of decades, and what this all means to society. And due to my innate curiosity, I've often wondered what it actually means to be gay and what homosexuality means to our society. The latest issue that has come up and more or less been decisively solved, at least where I live in Canada, is gay marriage. Gays can now legally get married, simply because, if you ask me, the overwhelming majority of non-gay Canadians just don't care if gays get married and see nothing wrong with, or don't really have much of an opinion on whether or not gays get married, but might have strong opinions on whether or not they are legally blocked from getting married. So, of course, the laws that are made by Parliament are altered, which get interpreted by the courts to say, yes, gays can get married. Now, first objection to this, as I recall, was the slippery slope. If we allow gay marriage, then what next? Well, okay, then people say that we'll allow incest, we'll allow gay adoption, we'll allow, who knows, bestiality, public orgies, or whatever. Now, the general response to that is to sort of poo-poo it and say, oh, don't be ridiculous, or, whatever. But 30 years ago, people poo-pooed the idea of gay marriage. So I don't think that just sort of dismissing these kinds of objections are an effective way of countering them. What I would say is, when you start referring to the slippery slope, you've got to remember that you're talking about something that works both ways. Okay, I understand the concern about where is all this going to lead, but by the same token, if we start telling people what sexual acts they can and cannot practice, or telling people who they can and cannot marry, where will that lead? The slippery slope works the other way. I like certain sexual practices that others might consider unnatural, depending on who I ask. Oral sex, birth control. A lot of women prefer certain positions which are would have been considered in the past unnatural. Why do you think that we call the missionary position the missionary position? Because the missionaries arrived, or at least so the legend goes, and saw these benighted heathens having sex in strange positions, maybe woman on top or rear entry or something like this, and said, oh, no, you can't do that because that's evil, that's animalistic, that's primitive, it's non-Christian. The way you do it is the man gets on top of the woman, you face each other, she spreads her legs, and that's that. The rest, well, more or less comes naturally, of course. So, that's not, in my opinion, that's not a baseless fear. The fear that pretty soon people are going to start labeling all kinds of things as unnatural. And where does that lead us? Where does that go? Wasn't that long ago, young Catholic boys were told that they would go to hell if they masturbated. Now, the insanity of that is, the adolescent male who has not masturbated must be about 1 in 10 million. Your sex drive is basically completely taken over in many ways, and you have no sexual outlets. Good luck in trying to suppress that one. Throughout history, I wonder how society has adapted to this issue. The previous issues seem to be gays in the military. Well, anyone who knows military history knows that homosexuality has had a long association with militarism. There's even the gay subculture that stresses military uniforms, being very muscular and masculine, being essentially very soldier-like. There's always been plenty of this. The obvious example that everyone knows about, thanks to Hollywood, is Richard the Lionhearted. But there's and Alexander the Great. But there's plenty of other examples of this throughout history of homosexual soldiers. The ancient Greeks were probably the best soldiers of the classical civilization, and they knew they equated homosexuality with militarism. So it's not that clear that it's likely to actually cause any trouble in terms of military discipline. And again, 90% of heterosexuals don't care. So, if we cater to the people that do care, what effect will that have on military discipline and morale? Also, my father once relayed a story to me, and I think it was when gays in the military were coming up. He was objecting to the fact that this suddenly had become a public issue. He's since altered his position, by the way. But he sort of said, look, when I was growing up in a small religious community in eastern Canada, rural Canada, there was a gay couple, a couple of elderly men, that everyone knew that they were homosexual. But because they were discreet about it, because they acted as though they were just friends that lived together and kept up the nice false front, which everybody had to keep up in those days, women just got pregnant through some sort of magic. No one talked about sex in general, let alone gay sex. They were more or less left to their own devices. No one bothered them. No one cared. The worst they would get would be a little nervous giggle when the subject of them came up, or maybe somebody would roll their eyes. But they certainly weren't harassed or let alone persecuted for their sexual preference. It was this the kind of benign blindness or hypocrisy which one often sees in small towns. People that are kind of deviant in one way, as long as they're generally good members of the small community, generally their foibles are looked the other way, or are looked at as though they're minor little things, and by and large the whole person is good. That's how small town people tend to see things. I actually know of a previous coworker of mine who's gay, who lives with his partner in a small religious community in eastern Canada, shades of my father, and he rarely encounters any trouble at all. All of his neighbors know his proclivities, I suppose we'd call it, but he's the kind of person where he grew up in a small town himself, so he's got that inborn conservatism as well, and it's just, to all outward appearances, it's just two men living together. No one apparently says anything about it. They run a bed and breakfast in the community, so they're kind of an economic contributor to the community. And they're generally left to their own devices, even though probably 95% of the community are regular churchgoers and very socially conservative. They're familiar with this kind of conduct, but if you play by the rules of the small religious community, you're left alone. A lot of gay people, I'm sure, in today's Deep South would see this in the United States. So I think that the whole gay rights issue, at least in terms of resistance to it, is kind of a non-issue. Anyone who's worried about the encroachment of homosexuality into our life kind of has a distorted view of the way things have always been. They've always been among us. They've always been part of us, and by acknowledging that, the world will not come to an end. Thank you.